So Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Welcome to the next phase of the Bhagavad Gita, the Gita course. Today we're going to enter into the universal domain of the Bhagavad Gita. Up until now, we have been working primarily or revealing the Gita from the first 6 chapters, which basically address the individual effort required to prepare our systems in order that the universe can take over the process. So I wanted to point this out relative to the journey of consciousness chart that we showed in the first talk, and that is that the thought, the truth, descends into matter, into the creation, and then becomes identified, loses its identity as truth, and becomes content. In the language of the Gita, it loses its ability to know itself as the Purusha, and it becomes the Prakriti, the content. It forgets it's the context, and it becomes the content. And until the human form, this identification is absolute. Even in animal life, the identification of consciousness with the vehicle it's occupying is almost total. The nearest thing it has is instinct. It's only when the more evolved animals start taking on some degree of what human beings call self-awareness that they begin to wake up to themselves as alive, as living. That there is a world, and there is them in a world. That distinction doesn't happen until, in the process of evolution, consciousness reaches a place where it can get a sense of I am, I exist. That's the beginning of the human journey, and the human journey is a great part of this, and all of us have been in the human journey. There's no one in this room, and probably very few people who would be here in this chapter 7 out of the 18 chapters of the Gita. They would have lost interest long before if there had not been some sense of coming out of the identification with the human aspect of the journey, the development of the human being. So I'm going to stand up and point to this diagram. So in the descent of consciousness, the loss of consciousness or its identification becomes complete when it enters into matter in the most primitive forms. And then as time goes on, the forms become more and more sophisticated, complex, because the interplay between consciousness as matter is to create matter more and more capable of holding consciousness. So the matter becomes more complex, more sophisticated. The parts learn to aggregate, to cooperate, to work together in greater and greater complexity. And this then allows consciousness to relatively wake up more and more. So in the human stage of the journey, when consciousness wakes up and becomes self-aware, this would be in the Bible the moment when Adam and Eve left the Garden of Eden. They left the natural state and became self-aware human beings with will and choice. So and this beginning to be able to see, there's them and everything else. This capacity to distinguish the two is the foundation of self-awareness. Therefore, the I am, or ego, takes its beginning. And then in the journey, ego is identified, or the consciousness is identified with its body primarily. It has the physicality and the drives that all animals have to reproduce, to eat, to feed, to be secure, to succeed. So this consciousness drives the early human being in a very what we would call primitive way. But as the consciousness develops, this identification with the body becomes less and less, and it becomes more and more identified with what we would call feelings or emotions, ambitions, drives. And this starts creating what we would have seen historically as civilization, the beginning of people working together, farming, language, communication, commerce, so forth. And that takes human beings to a place where they have some mastery over the physical creation. So we are at the peak as a civilization, as a world, a peak of that mastery, so much so that nature is pretty much now put into its own zoo. Now we have pretty much created this world as our zoo. We have no longer keeping ourselves protected from nature. Now we protect what remains of nature from humans. So in many ways we have literally and figuratively and collectively in consciousness reached a place where we're at full choice and full creation. In this time, many, many people are becoming dissatisfied with the human condition and waking up. So the Bhagavad Gita starts with the beginning of the waking up process. The spirit return journey. This is the descent. This is the immersion and the evolution. This is the ascent. So in the first 6 chapters, we talked about, instead of man transcending its animal nature, becoming the master of its animal nature to some extent, now it becomes the master of its human nature. It starts going beyond its human identity towards its spiritual identity. And this requires effort because the habit is to be human. It requires effort to break the habit of the human existence, family, relationship, responsibility, accomplishment, pleasure, pain, all those things. So this movement of breaking out of that usually starts with that's where the Gita starts, is dejection, chapter 1. Where the soul is no longer satisfied with being a human being, but the ego doesn't know that's what's going on. It just knows it's dissatisfied, that it's in perhaps pain, that it is perhaps not seeing anything worth value or meaning. So that's the beginning. So far, in the first 6 chapters of the Gita, we have basically been able to travel along the ascending journey to our origin, about halfway. This halfway point we talked about in the previous chapters at the point of no return. When the consciousness reaches sufficient velocity and distance to transcend the pull, the gravity of the human condition, that it automatically is no longer being pulled into it as much. That is the stage we're talking about, where the first step of the individual, through effort, preparing itself for the next phase of its evolution or its momentum towards its origin. All right, so that's where we find ourselves. This preparation period of the first 6 chapters is primarily learning to control the senses, learning to manage the tendency of the human being to be, oh, that's something I want, that's something I want, that's something I don't want, that's something I don't want. This, I have to have this, or this is missing, or I need to protect what I have to hang on to what's mine. All those inclinations come because of our identification with the senses. That means we utterly believe that what we see, what we touch, what we taste, what we smell, what we hear is real. Utterly believing that these organs, sensory organs, are giving us truth about the nature of creation, the nature of the world, and thereby, indirectly, the nature of who we are in the world. So, controlling the senses, managing the senses, through the various spiritual practices, through self-inquiry, through self-restraint and austerity, through pranayama, through meditation. All of these are means by which we begin to become aware of the consciousness that gets identified with the senses. We become aware that we're becoming identified. We become aware that we're making the story we have about the information that we got from the senses real, true. And that we become aware of ourselves being right about our story, right about how we see the world and how it is. So this tendency to lay claim to the information that we're getting and the habit of what we ruminate, right? The inner dwelling upon the information we received in the senses, right? Because when you're receiving from the senses, it's more immediate. But most of our time is inward, living in our mind, living in our feeling, living in our story about, our idea about, our ideals, our positions, and how we are, and who offended me, and who liked me, and who didn't like me. So we're caught up in this endless inner ruminations. And this is where we lose ourselves. We believe these feelings and these thoughts are true. So it's not just sensory control. It's beginning to control the part of ourselves that believes the story, believes the mood, believes the feeling. And in this process, in the first 6 chapters, we're basically strengthening the consciousness through these various practices, sadhanas, in which the consciousness can learn that it is self-existent, that it exists prior to the thought, prior to the feeling, prior to the input that comes from the senses. And it's this moving into relationship to that which occupies the body, that which lives your life, that which has a personality, that which has thought, that which has feeling, that who has needs or wants or preferences. We become in touch with that which has those things. No longer are we those things, lost in them. That point of no return, then you're now in orbit. You've now exceeded the pool of the human identity. Now, these first 6 chapters, for most people, take many years. The effort applied going through dejection, coming out of dejection through discrimination, learning how to integrate, being able to see what's true and not true from the vantage point of the soul, the principle of the soul, or the Atman in Sanskrit, of the consciousness itself, the Atman. And being able to see the world, who it is, and what the world is from that vantage point is discrimination. And then learning to live based on that information, learning to withdraw from the activities that identification had created. And that's the action, the yogic action. Action that takes us, moves us aligned with our purpose as beings that are returning to our origin or source. So all spiritual practice is action, disciplines, restraints, understanding, meditation, pranayams, breathing control, mantra. These are all methods by which we align ourselves with our ascent, our return to our origin. When these have become established, when these habits, when these patterns of behavior have become strong enough, that's when we become established in our own nature, in our own truth. In the 6th chapter of Gita, it's called the Yoga of Meditation, because at that point, you spontaneously can experience yourself as consciousness. That means the outer personality now can move into a relationship with its inner reality easily. It can feel as if the presence of that inner reality. That means in Sanskrit, in the language of the Gita, the Purusha has become more predominant than the Prakriti. And the Prakriti can experience the presence of the Purusha regularly. It's there as part of your life. In this case, things like meditation become natural. Contemplation become natural. Now, the nature of this entire first part of the journey is you're beginning this awakening up to the inner being, the inner self, the inner person, in the language of the Gita, the Purusha, the consciousness itself. It's individual. It's you're learning how to detach from your personal self, your individual personal self, and you're discovering your individual impersonal self. So you've been able to step back and become less attached to what people say, less hooked in to getting what you want or not getting what you want, less attached to how things turn out. So you become less personal in this moving out of the human condition into your true nature, your original nature. But it's still individual. So now this next part, these next 6 chapters, from chapter 7 to chapter 12, is when the universe then starts stepping in and revealing itself to the now impersonal individual consciousness. Instead of the consciousness, the awakened consciousness, looking at its egoic nature, looking at its family that it's detached from, looking at the things of the life that it's lived and how different it is now and how free it is from that misery and that suffering, it's now turning its attention away from that to its origin, to its source, at a whole new level, outside of the individual boundary, into the universal boundary. As you will see, there is no difference between the individual reality and the outer reality. It is only an error of perception, an error of the habit of the human existence that has it seem to be so. Okay. So we're going to start reading from the 7th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. And we'll start with the first verse. And Satyamayi will read it.
Chapter 7, the Yoga of Knowledge and the Process of Knowing. The Blessed Lord said, Arjuna, now hear from me how one who is exclusively linked with me and wants to strive further on the path of yoga, through my grace will attain full knowledge about me and become a perfect yogi.
So I wanted to set this as a precondition. Because basically most people are happy to be aware of themselves as consciousness. Their lives are sattvic, blissful, harmonious. They have natural wisdom. They don't get as reactive. They're more patient. They're more tolerant. They have the ability to grasp things very intuitively and all at once, the gestalt, the sudden showing of information. Their psychic is now fully open. So they're getting information about the world and the condition of things at the level of their psychic awareness. And so they are living really a charmed life relative to the human life. And many souls who come to this stage feel that's it. That's enough. I don't need anything more. I'm now free. And actually, in one sense, in the first stage as the individual, this is individual liberation. You're free from suffering at the individual level. This was, of course, Buddha's teaching, to become free from suffering. So in this state of consciousness, you're no longer getting hooked in to what the senses are telling you or the ruminations that come as the consequences of the senses because of your mental and vital nature. You're free of your identification and being taken down those rabbit holes of suffering where you avoid taking actions that feed the old structures of your human life, and you find peace. You find stillness and silence, and you're fulfilled. So this is no small attainment. When one has come to this state, effectively, they need not, out of effort, do anything more. Because the universe will bring what's needed. But it may not bring it right away. Because the universe will only come if you desire it, if you aspire for it. So if someone's in this state, they will happily go along. Many people are spiritual teachers and successful and capable spiritual teachers at this stage. I believe in the West, most people who are teaching, who are mature, have come to this state of the individual realized self. They've stepped out of their identification, and something of the radiance of the truth of what they are is being able to be received by others, and they automatically feel calm or peaceful or silent being in their atmosphere. But they have to have a sense that there's something more, otherwise they stay at that place. In the Bhagavad Gita, you'll see in this chapter that it may take lifetimes. It said it in the end of the last chapter of the 6th chapter. You know, if one is not able to attain the highest goal in the lifetime they live, then they come back. My teacher said, Sri Atmananda said, it would be 3 lifetimes at the most before the next phase of the journey would catch up with you. So a soul who's come to the point of this satisfaction would need to have a desire, ambition, and an aspiration for more. And the only way they're going to have that is if they already attained that state, or they have a purpose larger than individual realization, one or the other. Then there's a desire for more, a desire for God, a desire for a greater sense of the reality. It has a sense of something missing. This aspiration and this faith of something greater is the prerequisite for the entry into this next stage of the journey. It's not really only up to the universe. The universe will respond to one who has reached this state because the universe wants to wake up as us. It wants to wake up as us. So it's going to start actively conspiring to take you on to the next level, either in the life where the self-realization comes or in future lives. And what is the experience? The experience is said here, who wants to strive further on the path of yoga. That's the experience, the sense of further, of more than this.
I shall tell you everything about this knowledge, along with the process of realizing it, so that there will be nothing left for you to know.
So let's talk about knowledge. Jnana, Vijnana Yoga. The yoga of knowledge and the process of knowing. So I have revealed before that jnana, or knowledge, is actually an experience of the reality of what you are. The self-existent reality that lives you, that is not dependent on being a person. So jnana is like an illumination. It is an experience of connecting to something indescribable. And it has, at this stage of the journey, a strong pull, like a moth to a flame. Irrational pull to something it does not yet know. So it's about the nature of this knowledge and the process of experiencing this knowledge is what this chapter is focusing on. And while it will be taught, and this is what you're going to find, in these next chapters, it's not going to be mental as much. It's going to be felt. It's going to be recognized. It's not going to be able to be understood in the way perhaps we've been able to explain it as much, although I will attempt to speak around it and give enough understanding of what it is it's speaking of. But it's essentially a direct experience or recognition of the nature of your own reality at the next level. Okay.
Among thousands of men, 1 or 2 strive for the spiritual path, and of those who strive and attain perfection, 1 or 2 know me and the secrets of my true existence.
This is basically saying very few people make this transition. Okay, in case there was any doubt about that. It is rare. It is rare for someone to even be motivated. That means to even have the sense that there's something more. It's in my experience that it's until I meet people who have become stable in the self-realization, in the knowing themselves as the individual consciousness, it's when I meet them that they become in touch with something greater than themselves. They become quickened. It's like a fire ignites in them. Because remember, most of us in this room, and most of you who are listening to this tape, have traveled some distance on the path, and that's why you're interested. That's why you're here. You're still seeking something. So that seeking is like the dry wood seeking the flame. It's like you're rolling up because there's something in you that's smoldering, that wants to ignite, and it wants to burn. So when it meets a brighter flame, when it meets a brighter light, it seeks to be consumed. So this motivation is part of what it is. And this essential quality of a relationship to something greater than yourself becomes established when one who is awakened and is aflame, because they activate that part of you that wants to move to that wants to become that. And then that's the aspiration, that's the desire. And it becomes your obsession. It can become your obsession. But without that, you're not going to be able. And the number of people who are ready, either because they've completed this phase or that their destiny, their purpose is to go further. Because remember, one thing I should make clear, the Gita has four actually primary phases. The first is the individual realization. The second is the universal realization. The third is the realization of the supreme. And the fourth is the manifestation of that realization into the creation. But all these four phases are interacted with each other. You can be in one stage and be reflecting or expressing some part of the other stage. So they're intertwined. So one who comes to this state of the individual impersonal self can also be manifesting, can also have hints of the supreme, can also experience the universal revelations and insights to some degree. So we're trying to understand things as not as separate compartments, but as interrelated aspects of the same event that's occurring. It's like the whole thing's a hologram. So there's no part left out in any part. The whole is in the part, just like the part is the whole. The only difference is in the whole hologram, the image is full and complete and mature and distinct. But in the fragment, it's hazy and fuzzy and not so clear. So in this journey, and I'm describing these separate phases, don't be confused. They're not watertight. They flow into each other. So the number of people who come to the phase of moving out of the individual impersonal realization, the recognition of themselves as the jiva, the jivatman, the individual expression of the soul, that individual purusha, and are ready to go to the universal expression are few. 1 in a million maybe 1 in 100 million. How many can the planet contain? We don't know. But of those who do awaken to that, the number who actually complete this next phase are even more rare. Rarer still. Who know me and the secrets of my true existence. Okay, let's continue.
My material nature is divided into 8 parts: earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intellect, and ego. Arjuna, the above 8-fold division, is my lower nature. Apart from this, there is my higher nature, the universal soul, which is immanent in the embodied being and supports the whole world. All beings are born from me and have these 2 natures, higher as spirit or soul, and lower as matter or prakriti. I am the source of all origin and all dissolution.
So in these verses, basically, the consciousness is pointing to a stage in the consciousness where it begins to have revelations. about its predicament, about the conditions that it has been living up to now. It's seeing its body in a new light because it's no longer identifying with the body. It's seeing how the senses work. It's seeing how the mind works. It's experiencing it as direct insights, revelatory, into the nature of how I got to be this way and how we all got to be this way. So this revelation of the nature of the individual system starts with the fact that we all have bodies. The body is the organizing principle of consciousness. Consciousness is not organized without a body. Be clear about that. Consciousness is all existing, always has existed. It didn't get focused, it didn't get centralized, it didn't get organized until bodies came into existence. Plant bodies, animal bodies, insect bodies, cellular bodies. It didn't come into formation until those happened. Consciousness was not separate. So it begins to see consciousness at this stage begins to have these revelations. It begins to see the ego. It begins to see how it got stuck. It begins to see how other people are stuck. It begins to understand how it works, and matter of fact, how you can unstuck somebody who's stuck, someone who's so clinging, so attached, so desperate for what it is that they want that they can't let go. They can't get off it. But if they can find something in themselves that's greater or different than that, they can let go. And it begins to understand. This is where teachers become effective, because they can see how the people they're interacting with are still identified, still hanging on. So the person becomes quite useful and begins to understand the nature of how we ended up in this predicament. These 5 elements, divided into the 8 parts: earth, water, fire, air. Those 5 elements are abstracted definitions of what keeps our body together. They're basically what makes up the body. Ether is that which allows for consciousness to develop an intelligence. It is what eventually in a human being becomes what we would call a psychic awareness or intuition. In animals, this ether element holds what we would call the instinct, the knowing when there is danger without any physical evidence coming through the senses, knowing to go south in the winter and north in the summer. These are the nature of this quality of the ether element, holds what we would call the intelligence or the mind or the instinct. So it's not itself truly an element, but it's the context in which all these elements occur. It's the bowl that holds the soup of the 4 elements. So that's basically the body. The body is the miracle. The body, as the Gita will say later, will reveal later, is the greatest creation of existence. It is the gem, the fruit of all existence, in which consciousness can wake up, become self-aware. So we all have these 2 parts. One part is our human habit, our human life, and the other part is that which has those things, which holds those things. So I like to use the word context for the content of us. And all beings have this. Every being that has organized itself around a body has this organizing principle. That means an individual animal, an individual plant, has the ability to respond to the world around it individually. It's individualized, even though it doesn't know fully that it's individualized. It has individualized because it has a body. And every body can only live, only can take action, can only turn to the sun as a flower or run from the hawk if it's a mouse, if it has occupied, is animated by this principle of the Purusha, of consciousness, of the reality. Okay.
There is nothing higher than me. As pearls are threaded in a string, so also all the worlds are held in me. I am the taste in water, light in the sun and the moon, the sacred Om in the Vedas, sound in ether, and manliness in men. I am the pure fragrance in the earth element, heat and light in fire, the life force in all beings, and the aesthetic force in men of austerity. Arjuna, I am the seed of all creation, wisdom of the wise, and strength of the strong. In the strong I am the strength that is not corrupted by desire and attachment. And in all living beings I am the desire that is not contrary to their dharma.
So now, these are the beginning of the revelatory verses of the Gita. So basically, in this type of phrasing that you'll encounter in the Gita, it's indicating a revelation. Now, when your consciousness opens up to these things, these words activate something in you. It activates something about the essential quality that you are and that these things are. I am the pure fragrance, the smell of the earth. So when we smell something and we really get the smell, then we are in present time with that. And that there's a delight or an immediacy, a presence in that moment. So every time we are in pure presence with something in the sensory world, we're moving into relationship with its essence through our essence. It's not giving us anything. Rather, we're moving into vibrational frequency with its reality, with our reality. So this moving into relationship with the creation and these moments of immediacy, there I am, is what the Gita is saying. And that all things are threaded together like beads on a string. We're all intertwined in this matrix. All of us are different expressions of this same principle. That it's the reality that's taken on the clothing of our particular body, our particular quality of element, of wind and sky, air, fire, earth. So it's taken on this coating, but it's the same reality. This stage of the journey is when these kinds of experiences start coming to you. It means that the soul is opening up from its normal relationship with existence, not just with its inwardness, having turned and now is in relationship with its inwardness. It's now turning outward to its same nature outside of itself. This is the difference between the individual and the universal. Some people, the universal comes first. Some people, the individual comes first, where you move into relationship with the inner reality. And other people, the reality starts showing up around you as a love of nature, a love of the creation, a love of other people, a natural sense of connection with all things. So these are all reflective of the nature inclined to being going towards the universal, while a nature otherwise would be going to the individual. And in this relationship, where we start relating to the reality in the things around us, we are actually in a personal relationship with the universal. We're beginning to experience the personal universal. That's personal because we're still an individual experiencing it, and that it's individual expressions of the universal. So this moving into the relationship with all that is around you, above you, below you, is moving into relationship with the personal universal. One other part of the verse I wanted to point out, just to make it clear. In verse 291, the revelation is, Krishna's revelation to Arjuna is, in the strong, I am the strength that is not corrupted by desire and attachment. And in all living beings, I am the desire that's not contrary to their dharma. This strength, what is this strength? It says in the Gita, I am this strength. That means this strength in you, how is it different than desire and attachment? It's the strength of perseverance. It's the strength of enduring calmly. It's the strength of restraint. It's the strength of pulling, of the austerity of practices where you say no to your human habit or no to your animal inclinations. That's the strength it's talking about. Is that quality of capacity to be with and live consistent with the reality that lives it. That means it doesn't allow itself to get pulled away, forgetting that. It develops the skills. The more that quality builds in us, the Sanskrit word for this is tapas. The more this strength builds in us, the more the divine is in us. So people have this strength, have a quality of being where there isn't wavering, there isn't doubt, there isn't confusion. They have a certainty. They have a capacity to stand for what is true, to recognize the difference, and to act consistently with that, between what's true and what's not true. That's the nature of the strength. And that is your true nature expressed in your individuality. So the part of your individuality that would strive to be good in the world or to accomplish something or to get something, that's the human version of the same strength. And there's no wrong in that because you're developing the disciplines, you're developing the capacity to accomplish things as a human being in the world. And this strength that you develop through the course of the human life transmutes into this more profound strength that allows us inwardly to withdraw from our identifications and our attachments and our preferences, to withdraw from the old points of view that we've taken for granted, and to hold things in a different light than we've been habituated to.
The three states to which beings are subjected, Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas, have come from me and are in me, but I am not in them. The whole creation is deluded by these three states, and therefore they know not me, the imperishable, immutable, who is beyond all these gunas.
The whole creation is deluded by these three states. So guess what? You're all deluded. So am I. We're all living in this atmosphere of delusion. That means we think it's something other than it is. We believe and live and act as if it is something other than it is. So let's not understate the nature of delusion. And this chapter, as we'll see, points to the delusion, points to the nature of the delusion and how convincing it is. Because even on this stage of the journey, the habit of the human ego is still there. The tendency to want to believe it's right, the tendency to want to understand things and put it into a certain context so it can control something and avoid something. It's still there. The habit of egoing is still there. And as long as there's ego, delusion is occurring. And what are these forces? And this chapter just points to it. It was mentioned previously, the three gunas was mentioned previously in the second chapter. But now you're beginning to understand. You're being pointed to you can see that certain people vibrate at different frequencies than other people. And people who are vibrating in one frequency of tamas have a different capacity to know their reality than someone who's vibrating at the frequency of sattva or rajas. So this recognition of a universal force, and realize that we're actually all riding this current of these three energy waves. The nature of tamas, the nature of rajas, the nature of sattva. Tamas being the most identified with human matter, with the physical world, with the animal body, and with the lower human. Rajas is more human, the striving, the accomplishing, the getting, the organizing, the cooperating, this force. And the sattva, which is space for things to be. I like to say that tamas is about having. Rajas is about getting. And sattva is about being. So this is the entry point. And even preferring the equanimity, the space, the peacefulness of being, of sattva, is still delusion. So this is the clue. It's the clue of where we're going. It's like we're leaving the planet. We're leaving the atmosphere, the stratosphere. We're leaving the whole kit and caboodle behind and going into alien dimensions of existence in which human beings cannot survive. So it's a clue. It's an indication of where you're headed or where you go. So these gunas are there all the way up until the universe ends, the creation ends. So they're no small influence. Just like we live because there's air, because there's water. So we live, we exist, we act, we think, we feel because there's these three energy waves, these frequencies, which keeps the consciousness animated. And if you don't have a body, you don't have a receiver. So these don't exist when you don't have a body, or at least at the level of the physical. They're not apparently existing when they don't have a body. But these three waves are everywhere. We're in the soup, this ever-moving soup. Like in this room right now, the air is hardly moving. We have this little fan slowly churning, right? And so, but it's it's still moving, and we're being affected by the air moving or not moving. If we're conscious of it or not. Some of you are hot, and you're hotter because the air isn't blowing on you at this point. The design of the body has you feel uncomfortable, perhaps, or maybe you don't even notice. You're just sweating and everything's saturated, and you're not even paying attention because you're not living in that part of yourself that's connected. Your consciousness is someplace else. Another, you're squirming. So the gunas are part of the universal nature. They're just beginning to be a revelation, the early start of the revelation of the nature of what jnana is. What is jnana? Jnana is the showing of that which is not true. The showing is the light that allows you to see. Who you are is the light that allows for you to see, experience, and know. You're not those things, including your thought, your personal story, your personal idea of self. You're the illumination that animates this vehicle. So this is a showing of the nature of what's real and not real. That is felt. It's not, this stuff isn't knowledge like we think of knowledge in the mental plane or the intellect plane. This is immediate, direct recognition, revelation of the nature of reality in the existence around you. And then you'll code it with a languaging of understanding, perhaps to communicate, or perhaps you just see it. You just know it. Like a dolphin. Highly intelligent, consciousness. It doesn't keep records. It doesn't record conversations. It doesn't do videotaping. It doesn't explain things. It just lives. It just is. Till it isn't. So it has intelligence, but it doesn't have this capacity to mentalize it, to need to organize it, to focus it into words. So the understanding comes second. The revelation comes first. So people at this stage of the journey, you're moving into a revelatory relationship with what you've taken for granted up to now. You're seeing through new eyes, tasting through a new tongue, new skin, new ears, new nose. It's the filters have dropped away, and there's this immediacy, and the immediacy is revelatory.
It is very difficult to transcend my threefold divine Maya, but those who take refuge in me in utter devotion overcome this.
This is your way out. We talked about delusion. There is only way out. The way out is to be single focused on your whatever ability that you have, capacity that you have to experience your original nature, to experience the Purusha that you are, to disidentify with the Prakriti, and that relationship of your individual Purusha to which we will find out is the universal Purusha. And this is devotion. This is obsession. This is what you live for. This is the only way out. Is you take refuge. Now the word refuge is the first time the Gita uses the word refuge here up to now. It says, take refuge in me. So what happens is we are emerging from our individual. We're actually entering a domain that we can't possibly know. But if we can take refuge in that sense of the universal that comes at this stage, be it God or be truth, this surrendering to it or this turning in a prayerful attitude to it, this looking up or reaching up to it, this is the means you can transcend your bondage. This is the way out. A consistent and persistent prayer, you might say, to something greater than yourself, for it to reveal itself, as well as to reveal what's between you and it, what's hidden, what's blocked, what's obscured. So to take refuge in me, in utter devotion. So here the word devotion is talking of a relationship. It's a felt experience. Devotion is this sense of connecting versus separating. The sense of moving into relationship with something. That's what devotion is, from a position of separation. So this feeling, this vibration that occurs as you move into relationship to your reality is devotion. And you take refuge in that experience. You take nurturance from that intimacy, increasing intimacy with your universal reality. It's only through that. Otherwise, the three gunas are so enticing, they're so distracting, they're so obscuring that you cannot come out of this.
The evildoers, the ignorant, and those who are below the level of human understanding never come to me, as their knowledge is covered by Maya, and they cling to undivine attributes.
Maya. This is delusion. It's interesting how the Hindus have given delusion a female name. Maya, seduction, trap, enticement, enchantment. Maya, that's Maya. So, and what happens is that the consciousness that is not far enough on the journey is still identified with its animal or human consciousness. Then they can't know this. Or if it comes, the glimmer of it, it gets overtaken by the habit of their human identity, the habit of their lower nature pulling them. They come with an addiction to something, a perversion, some unmet part of themselves that's keeping them cycling through a pain structure or an obscurity, a positionality in order to keep intact their separative existence, thinking they need to do that. The ego still runs them. So there's no possibility for them to take this part of the journey. They can evolve in the first part of the journey through discipline, through restraint, through turning attention, through organizing their life. But in this start of the journey, the parts of you that are still habituated to your animal or human existence is why you can't make progress, or why your states come and go. There's unmet parts of you that are keeping you from knowing it. Okay.
Arjuna, 4 types of virtuous men worship me out of devotion. They are the distressed, the seekers of knowledge, the seekers of wealth, and the men of wisdom. Among them, the man of wisdom is very dear to me, as I am to him, since he is in constant union with me. All 4 types are noble, but I consider the man of wisdom as my true self, for he is ever in communion with me and considers me his supreme goal.
So in this case, the Gita is pointing to people who are at different stages in the first part of the journey. The person who is in distress is still in the dejection. They're still struggling to come out of suffering. The person who's seeking knowledge is still there in that category of trying to move into relationship with what is real, what is not real. They have not come to the full maturity, but at that point they can be pulled to the higher truths. They can have experiences, glimmers, realizations, even though they're still not fully separated from their identification with their limited self. So it's saying that all of these are noble. One who's seeking spiritual wealth. What is spiritual wealth? Spiritual wealth is the experience. It's to be able to have the experience. And it's the wanting that experience, that enticement, that higher, greater enchantment, which is also Maya, Mahamaya, but still, it's much different than the human enchantments. So they want the wealth, they want the experience, and they want the cities or the powers or the spin-off, the recognitions, the fame, whatever. So they're coming to the spiritual path with those mixed desires. And then there are the men of wisdom, the souls who've reached what I was describing before, where you're in your own orbit, where you've come to the impersonal self, and you have found a peace, you have found a place of rest, and that you have switched, you may not fully realize it, you've switched your identification from being your story, being a person, having a personality, having things you want, to that which has those things. This is a being of wisdom. And the Bhagavad Gita is saying, these are the ones that are ready. I consider that as my true self. For he or she is in communion with me automatically, because there's no difference between the universal and the individual, except from the point of view of the individual. Ever in communication with me and considers me his supreme goal. So this again is a matter of devotion. It's a matter of moving into relationship with something greater than yourself. And this pull to being that, to experiencing that, to knowing that, that's the true jnana, the true knowledge at this stage of the journey.
After many births, the jnani attains my true state and realizes that Vasudeva, the omnipresent being, is all. Such a great soul is indeed a rare devotee and difficult to find. When the wisdom is carried away by desire, one begins to worship other deities according to one's nature of faith and follows the rules of such worship. Whatever may be the deity that a devotee worships for fulfillment of desires, I stabilize the faith of the devotee on that deity. Due to this strong faith, the devotee receives the desired object from that deity as ordained by me. However, these fruits, gained by people of narrow understanding, are all transitory. The worshipper of gods goes to the godly plane, but my devotees, by whatever method they may worship me, attain me.
So now the Gita is beginning to reveal the nature of the journey through this next dimension of experience and knowing. This Mahamaya. Like Maya there's the human Maya, the Maya of not knowing who you are. You're just a person, you're driven by emotions and feelings. And the Mahamaya is this domain of bigger energies, bigger vistas, bigger experiences that come as you move out of your individual identity into the universal identity. And what the Gita is pointing to at this point is that one who is a true jnani, which we had described in the previous reading of the verse, that one who is my true self, one who is a noble soul due to their wisdom. This jnani carries the possibility of going beyond all the enchantments of this other dimension of Maya and attaining my true nature. They're a rare soul and very precious. Because for most other beings is that when your system starts turning away from the human paradigm and you start turning to the universe, tremendous other dimensions of existence become revealed, experienced. You're experiencing energy, you're experiencing insights, recognitions. You may be meeting actual beings that have levels of attainment, or you may just chant a mantra and a tremendous force comes down. These are all enchantments, and any one of these enchantments can capture the soul who's at this early stage of the journey and keep it enthralled. And it will come to you. It will come to you because you're actually moving towards your reality, but you're getting waylaid. You're getting caught up in one aspect of all the aspects of divine in the universal. So it's very hard to recognize this is an enchantment when it's so different than what you were as a realized human being, as an individual had waken up to itself into the impersonal condition of consciousness. Now you're moving into the personal universal, and its action is seduction, enchantments of a whole different order. So this is what happened to me in 1998. That's when I made that transition right into the domain of the universal, and it was literally like one enchantment after another enchantment after another enchantment, energies and insights and experiences and dimensions and beings. You know, could say a mantra and there was this tremendous force comes in. Say another mantra, and a whole different kind of force comes in. It's like suddenly all these powers come, all these capacities come. What's left in your ego says, I'm there, I'm it. I'm the one, let me teach you, guide you, transmit to you, show you. And there's not a bad day, because any bad day they evoke any mantra. It's gone. It's in a state of different, it's transhuman. You are tasting, you're living in the next layer of Maya. And everything from the human habit, you want to hang on to a certain kind of experience, or you want to get another experience, expand, have more of it, more of it, more of it. These are all transitory and temporary. And that's how you can tell they're not true. Because they come and go. But it's a necessary stage to fall in love with God and to take one aspect of God be it Christ, or be it Krishna, or Shiva, or Buddha, and to focus your attention and to move into relationship with that, you are able to evoke something of what it is you're attending to. So when you attend to Christ, something of the Christ consciousness comes to you. When you attend to Shiva, something of the Shiva consciousness comes to you. And you think, that's it. There's only Shiva. And then the Shivaites fights with the Vishnuites. And the Krishnans fight with the Muslims. And so on and so on. Because ego says, this is the path. This is the revelation. You see this in people who have ecstatic experiences in the Christian tradition, where then they're so right about their insight and their experience. So the human ego in them is still strong. And they've taken something that's true. They're experiencing something greater than themselves. But it keeps coming and going. You feel the experience, then it goes away. But you want to convert everybody that this is the way. I know, because it's my experience, therefore it must be your experience. But the fact is, there are unlimited emanations in this dimension of the universal. Unlimited. And there's the ones that are occurring right close to the surface, the fairies and the what's the other? Gnomes, whatever else. They're chanting these little sprites and so on. These are one dimension. Then there's the next dimension where there is ghosts and spirits and the ancestral plane. We'll talk about this later in the Gita. So there are enchantments, levels of enchantments, and these levels of enchantments are just like here, tamasic, rajasic, and sattvic. So to recognize that you can get trapped, to recognize these universal forces, takes your ego. Of course, it's a bigger, more expanded, less dense, more porous, more capable ego. But it's still ego that's able to move into relationship to the personal universal. The universe coming to us through our personal identity. And it comes, and by the way, these forces come to our human personality through our individual impersonality. When we become detached from our human side, when we come in touch with that self-existent reality that lives us, it's like a doorway. It's an opening into these universal forces. But who experiences them? Who feels them? Who gets enchanted by it is the personality. What's left in your personality that still wants pleasure, that wants to avoid pain, to feel good about itself, to feel in control. That's the part that gets enchanted. What's left in your ego. The key is anything that comes and goes is not it. Even if it comes and goes frequently. I know, because I figured that the secret was to have the experience continuously.
Bottom line, experiences come and go.
Yeah, yes, right. So this coming and going of experience is the evidence that you're not there yet. So I came to a point where it was coming and going a lot. I would meditate hours and hours and hours and hours, but eventually I'd get exhausted. And then I'd be cranky. Until the next time where it would come in, and then it would feel great, and then it would go. So I reduced the amount of time because I was living a life completely removed from the human condition. I was living on the satellite station that's near the moon, or maybe the one next to the sun. I had transcended the human paradigm, and from that place you get a more immediate relationship to these innumerable attractions in this domain of the personal universal. And I thought that was all there was. But the nature of it is after you've had these experiences again and again and again and again, you grow weary. You say, okay, all right, enough. I don't even want to chant anymore. I don't even want to meditate. It's just too much. It becomes saturated. You become saturated. So that's the clue, and that's one of the beginning as we talk about the rest of this journey, about the transition where you come out of these enchantments. Okay.
Because of ignorance, people are not able to realize my unmanifest nature and believe that I have assumed a finite form by birth. They are unable to know me, the Supreme Being, beyond the reach of mind and senses.
Keep going.
Veiled by my Yoga Maya, I am not manifest to all. Hence, these ignorant people are unable to know me, the unborn and the imperishable Supreme.
So you are the Supreme. I like to rephrase this statement. Because of ignorance, people are not able to realize not my unmanifest nature, speaking of Krishna, but their unmanifest nature. And believe that they have assumed a finite form by birth. And therefore they're unable to know themselves as the Supreme Being, beyond the reach of mind and senses. See, this gives you an insight into the nature of how delusion works. It thinks that it's something outside of itself. Even in this stage of the Gita, Krishna is saying me, my, because the human being can relate to something that it can't comprehend as outside of itself, better than that what it is, in fact, is something incomprehensible. So moving in a relationship to something that's incomprehensible is harder than moving in relationship to a Shiva statue or a Ganesh statue or a saint or a spiritual person. So this is the nature of ignorance. The nature of ignorance is you don't know your reality. You don't know what you really are. And then veiled by Yoga Maya. And now this is saying Yoga Maya. Well, what kind of Maya is Yoga Maya? Right? We have Maya and then we have Mahamaya. What kind of yoga is Yoga Maya? Yoga Maya is the part of you that thinks you can make progress through your own effort. Yoga Maya is that which makes you convinced that it's your effort that's getting you there. And so then there's this conversation about your attainment and where you are on the journey and how great your teacher is or what an idiot your teacher is, whichever your mood tells you. So it's basically the Yoga Maya is one who gets righteous about their spiritual practices. The ego lays claim and it becomes its new identity. Living in ashram with Satri, it's my new identity. And it becomes something that acts as another kind of veil on your already whole and complete reality. Hence, ignorant people are unable to know me, the unborn and the imperishable Supreme. So literally, if somebody walks into the room who is the Supreme Being, you would say, who is that guy? What are you bothering me for? Because you don't have the ability to perceive your own reality, therefore you can't perceive your own reality in another. And when you have discovered your own reality, you're in awe in the reality that's in everyone around you. So this ability to recognize your own nature is the key to coming out of this Maya, this veil of delusion, in which all of us have been subject from birth and will not be free of until we have gone beyond the highest dimension of the universal. Okay.
I know all beings, their past and present, and also of all those who shall come in future, but no one knows me. Arjuna, right from their birth, all beings are deluded due to attraction, repulsion, confusion, and attachment.
It's not our fault. It's not our fault that we're stupid. It's not our fault that we're deluded. It's not our fault that we think we're small, stupid, and powerless. It came with every body. This is the nature of taking a birth. You could be a high being, and when you take a birth, you become an idiot.
And you become stupid and small, complaining and crying out, totally dependent on everything of people around you to be fed, to be comforted, to keep warm, to be protected from the elements. This is the nature of it. Therefore, right from birth, no matter how evolved as a soul we are, the nature of this dimension is delusion. It's not your fault. The second is something of the characteristics of it. So if you want to know what you're deluded, what most deludes you, so relatively speaking, is just look at what you're attached to. Look at what it is you prefer. Look at what it is you're attracted to and what you're repulsed by. These will give you indications of where your delusion is densest, most apparent, most tenacious. You believe your thought. You have a thought without questioning. You believe the thought is true, not recognizing that that's what you're doing, is believing the thought. And if it's a negative thought, a fearful thought, that's coming from reasons you don't know, then you don't have any ability to separate yourself from identification with that thought. And therefore the thought takes you wherever it takes you, and you're the victim of that thought, or that feeling, or that sensory experience, or that pleasure. It's the nature of delusion. It leads you down the primrose path and drops you in the mire, in the manure, Maya and manure. You end up being lifted up and thrown back down. What goes up comes down in Maya. It comes and goes, comes and goes. That's its nature. It's temporary and reoccurring in existence. And it's not your fault. It's how this dimension was designed.
But due to their virtuous deeds, those who are free from sin are not deluded by this Maya and worship me with strong faith and devotion. Those who worship me with faith and devotion are liberated from the cycles of birth, aging, and death, and know the Brahman, which is true knowledge. Through their constant link with me, those who are able to know me as the ultimate spiritual power in matter, the source of cosmic intelligence, and the Lord of all sacrifices, are always in me. This knowledge is present in them even at the time of death, and enables them to merge in me. Thus ends the 7th chapter of Gita, entitled The Yoga of Knowledge and the Process of Knowing.
A true jnani is rare. One who's really ready to traverse the universal dimension is a rare being. Rare among the rare. And this capacity, due to their virtuous deeds, that means deeds, the actions that are aligned with truth, the habit that they've created in this life and in previous lives, they have this ability not to be enticed, to be able to discriminate instinctively or psychically, intuitively, to know, to go beyond where other peoples would get enchanted or enticed or trapped. There is this capacity, a determination, a focus, a capacity for commitment. These are the virtuous qualities that allows one who is having the experience of faith and devotion to make progress. Because faith and devotion alone won't get you there. It'll get you different aspects, different dimensions of experience. But it won't in itself get you there. So it's this someone who has that determinate intellect, that stable determination, that actually can cross this dimension and begin to discover their supreme nature. This is what it's pointing to. And these things of the ultimate spiritual power and matter, the source of cosmic intelligence, universal intelligence, the Lord of all sacrifices. That means, who is it that we make our sacrifices? To what do we sacrifice? All sacrificing is for something greater, a true sacrifice for something greater than us. Whatever we may think it is, we sacrifice for our children, we make that greater than us. We sacrifice for our country, we make it something greater of us. So whatever it is that we're sacrificing for is the Lord of all sacrifices. And that's what you are. Hard to grasp. And that's the beginning of the phrasing of what we're going to enter into when we look at the next chapter, chapter 8, the Akshara Brahma Yoga, the yoga of the imperishable Brahman. So all glory to Gurudev. This ends the revelation of chapter 7 of the Bhagavad Gita.